And as we say, if you are here, you belong. Slow breath in and welcome. Carriers of inner light, every one of us. Carriers of divine spirit. Slow breath in and welcome. Before we begin our lesson, I wanted to give you some time to be thinking about the first question that we'll bring up during What Are You Thinking? And here it is. In the lesson, I'm going to describe the term egoless love, kind of what it looks like, what it might be like. Well, today's first question will be, have you experienced it? So as you're listening, be thinking, have I seen that? Have I experienced egoless, but if not egoless, maybe ego diminished? Have I experienced ego diminished love? And if you have, did you experience it as the giver? Did it flow through you? Or did you experience it as the receiver? Did it come to you? And then the question will be, what was it like? Describe it. Give it some texture. Okay, egoless or ego-diminished love in your experience. So we're finishing up our summer lesson today, the hero's journey, a human developmental journey we've seen in 3 stages. We've been going too many weeks to give a proper recap right now, so you may want to catch up online. I think it was a pretty good lesson. I'm, of course, biased, but well, today, the 3rd stage, the hero goes home. Now, we've seen maybe we don't go home to the home we left because the journey does change us, and sometimes we are not accepted back to the home that we left. But if not that home, we find a home, a place where we can give our gift, where we can love and be loved. So we finish this lesson thinking together about that, about coming home. Now we've seen as our false selves unravel, as we awaken to a bigger reality, a deeper us is unearthed, a truer self, a divine center self, a better angel's self. Kind of like what happened to Neo at the end of the Matrix. Sure, he wakes up to the Matrix itself, he does, but he also awakens to who he is in the Matrix. No longer a limited version of self, no longer an illusion self, using the language of our lesson, no longer a village persona self, not limited by fear, not as driven to hide from vulnerability. Like all of our myths and stories and fables, the Matrix resonates because it describes a deep, universal human experience. The dawning realization that awaits us all that being stripped of our illusion selves, catching glimpses of this bigger reality, we start to feel a more expansive version of ourselves emerging. Go through the ordeals, have our base desires demoted to their proper place, have our passions properly prioritized, and we find that under the ego self, there is a more authentic version of who we are, a more expansive version of who we are, and we find there is a great gift to give. Because unearth that more authentic version of ourselves, and the scarecrow does awaken into what always was intelligence. And the lion awakens into what always was courage, and the tin man into compassion. We awaken to our gift when we awaken to the more authentic version of who we are. But here's the thing about that. No matter what our gift turns out to be, and it's different for all of us, all of our gifts are made out of the same stuff. All of our gifts are stitched together of the same raw material. Now, before I tell you about that essential ingredient of all of our gifts, let's go back to an earlier lesson. Let's remember together that when we awaken to the reality that is greater than we knew, after the first stage of the journey, as we emerge into the second, we awaken to this fundamental realization that in that greater reality, everything is connected. Or as we say all the time in the community, oneness is a better description of reality than two-ness. Now, we repeat that pithy saying so frequently because it's how we make sense of our own tradition's ancient spirituality. Because approach our tradition's wisdom from a two-ness framework, and it increasingly does not make sense. It becomes too tight, it becomes too constraining. But begin to approach that same wisdom, that same tradition through the lens of everything is connected, and a story that stopped making sense starts to be very helpful. Reality is connected. You and I are connected. You and I and the divine are connected. You and me and the other, even the enemy that Jesus said that we would be able to love, connected. Everything is connected, as well as the rocks and the trees, and everything is connected. Part of an interconnected wholeness. Well, once we awaken to that bedrock insight, it's not long before we begin to realize that there is an essential virtue that is necessary to function in an interconnected reality. Now, it's such an ancient insight that we speak of the concept using a Greek word. But here's the thing. It's also a church word. And over time, here's what happens to church words. They take on layers and layers of meaning and perhaps get a little counterproductive, maybe somewhat unhelpful. And if you grew up in church, I wish I could bypass the part of your brain that is familiar with this word, but I can't. So it's a good word. It just needs some rehabilitation. The Greek word is agape, and it means love, but it doesn't mean I love pizza love, and it doesn't mean I love my kids love. It doesn't even mean I love truth and beauty love. If you grew up in church, you heard it as the love of God. And that is the not very helpful part, because it's not exactly that. Now, we have sure used it that way. Even in our ancient texts, we have used it that way. But that's a use. It's not a meaning. And there's a distinction between the two. It's a lofty word. It's a noble word. It speaks of an exalted form of love. So when we tried to put in words that which cannot be put into words, when we tried to speak of the divine and talk about God, when we tried to talk about things that we cannot really talk about, one of the words that we hit on was the most exalted form of love that we knew, agape. But that's when things started to go a little bit sideways. Because once agape belongs to God, the word loses something very important. We lose its everyday world connotations. And that is essential for understanding what the word means. The word did not originate in religion. The word originated in families. When people love over time, different kinds of love emerge. There is sibling love. There are friends who love. There is a shared history kind of love. There is a parental kind of love. And one of those, and it's most often seen in older people, is a love that has significantly less ego in the mix. This kind of love loves whether the beloved returns that love or not, whether the beloved even behaves or not. It's a kind of love that is given not because there is a return on investment. We don't love because we will be loved back. We don't love for what we can get from our beloved. It's a love that is given simply because the giver has become, over time, loving. Now, we often see this in a parent or in a grandparent, a person who loves no matter what the beloved does or doesn't do, simply because they have become loving. A love that is not linked to ego needs. A love that is not linked to ego strategies, to our core fears or our core lies or the fatal flaw that we saw during this lesson. So that makes it a very beautiful kind of love. And that's why we grabbed that word and began to use it to talk about the divine. But it's a very human trait. Now, it's sometimes rare, it is, but it is a deeply human trait, and it is for you, and it is for me. Now, all that matters because this kind of love, this diminished ego kind of love, this selfless kind of love, it is the essential ingredient of any gift that we are going to have when we make the turn for home. When we start coming back from this hero's journey and we come bearing the great gift, that great gift is going to have this kind of love as the essential core ingredient. So, as we've seen, you go through the ordeals. You strip away the ego self. You strip away the fear self. You strip away the village self. You realize that we live in a oneness world, and what we discover inside of ourselves is what our very first story called the breath of God. The inner presence, the inner capacity, the divine source we carry within us that animates these bodies of clay and make us us. This egoless love is part of that. It's part of that divine center, part of the package. And egoless love was always inside of you, and it was always inside of me. What this heroic journey does is it strips away a whole bunch of lesser stuff that was getting in the way and keeping that egoless love from emerging. Divine breath was always in there. Divine spirit was always in there. Selfless, egoless, everything connected love was always in there. And whatever great gift we bring when we make the turn for home, it'll be made out of that. It'll be made out of egoless love. Agape is the glue that holds together this interconnected reality that we emerge into. It is the glue that holds together this reality that's bigger than we knew. Selfless love is what makes things work when we realize that we live in an everything is connected reality. Because we are connected. Your fate and my fate are inextricably connected. One community's economic troubles will eventually become everybody's economic troubles. One community's viral mutation will eventually become everybody's viral mutation. Everything is connected. And the glue that holds that interconnected reality together, the glue that makes it work, is agape. It is egoless love. It is the love that I care about your troubles even if they're not my troubles. I function in a love that is bigger than my ego needs, bigger than my fear needs, bigger than my response to my resistance to vulnerability needs. So that eventually I participate in making the reality that everything is connected real. And that's what happens to us on this heroic journey that we've spent all summer talking about. That's what happens to us. We have unearthed from within us that divine center version of self that is capable of egoless or ego-diminished love. When we emerge into the bigger reality, the everything is connected reality, we emerge into agape selflessness. We love because what the journey does is help us become loving. Now, you would think that's good news, right? But it's not. Too bad, because we've just spent all summer saying this is a stinking long journey. It takes a long, long time for egoless, selfless love to emerge. It takes a long, long time to accept the invitation to the journey, to work through all the resistance to even take up the journey, to cross the threshold and to face our dragons and be stripped down by the dark night, to eventually see the bigger reality and eventually awaken to that source that is deep within us and find there that there is within us selfless love that has been there all along. Yeah, it's too bad, because that takes a long, long time. And you know what? We could really use some selfless love right now in your house and mine, on our jobs, at our schools, in this ugly drama that's playing out in our nation. We could really use a little bit more selfless, egoless love right now. Well, it is the end of the lesson, so I would be remiss in my duties if I didn't finish with some good news. So I have got some good news for you. We do not have to wait. We don't have to wait for this process to unfold. Here's the value of some very fine preacher standing up and spending a whole summer outlining the roadmap of this human developmental journey. The value of the last 10 weeks that we've spent is that it provides for us a roadmap. And a roadmap, first of all, tells us what the twists and turns are that we will likely face as we go along the way, and that's good, because that helps us know what to watch for as we go through each stage of the journey, and so very, very helpful, a roadmap. But the other thing that the roadmap tells us is where this journey is eventually heading. It tells us that this journey will take us into the reality of everything is connected, and will take us into the realization that we are carriers of the glue that holds that reality together. Once we know that the journey takes us to oneness, once we know that the journey takes us to everything is connected, and once we know that the essential virtue in that reality, the virtue that holds it all together, is selfless, egoless love, well, here's what we can't do. We can't just flip a switch and become egoless love. No, that's not how it works. It is a process. It is a journey. There is resisting, and there is ordealing, and there is dark nighting. There is all of that. But what we can do is participate in advance by training for that part of the journey. We can make it easier for ourselves, and we can make it easier for everyone around us by readying ourselves for where this journey takes us. So no, we can't flip a switch and become egoless love. But what we can do is exercise egoless love. We can practice egoless love. We can cultivate it. We can prepare ourselves for it. We can foster it, and we can encourage it. And it turns out, even while we're just training ourselves, we're bringing a little bit more of that egoless love into the world that we participate in shaping every day. So it's not exactly a fake it until you make it dynamic. It's more a lift 10 pounds today so that tomorrow you can lift 20 pounds dynamic. We can train ourselves for egoless love. And we can do that no matter where we are on this journey. We can do that when we're still in the village. We can do that when we're struggling with the ordeals. We can do that in the darkest of nights. We can do that. We can cultivate selfless love, and we can do it right now. We cultivate anger and resentment all the time. We know how to do that. All you have to do to cultivate anger and resentment is just keep grinding away over some offense that we've got in our heads. All we have to do is keep rehearsing it. All we have to do is keep nursing it. All we have to do is keep reading about it on our news feed, dredge it up again and again and again. We are training ourselves to be good at anger and resentment. Well, why not do the same with understanding and kindness and compassion and selflessness? Because our brain works to reinforce and train us in one context, but the thing is, we got the same brain. We can apply those same dynamics in another context. We can keep running in our heads, and we can keep rehearsing, and we can keep nursing, and we can keep dredging, and we can keep training understanding and compassion and kindness. And if we decide to do that, as with all training processes, the thing to do is to start where we are and grow from there. My wife and daughter started going to the gym, and my wife reported to me, I did not start where I was. I started way beyond where I was, and she spent 2 days having a hard time sitting into a chair. So we start where we are. I want to give you a few practical examples that hopefully that will help you design your own agape training plan. So you probably have some whipping boy in the back of your head somewhere. Some person or some group of people who represents all of the bad feelings that you carry, all of the things that you think are screwing up the world and screwing up your life. So maybe for you, that demon person is an anti-vaxxer, mucking up the works for all of us. Or maybe it's somebody trying to shove a vaccine on you when you're very concerned about your health. Maybe it is Trump. Maybe it is Biden. Maybe it's a climate denier, or maybe it's somebody who's using climate to threaten your livelihood. There are plenty of candidates out there. You will not have a hard time finding your demon person. That person who lurks in the back of your head, who represents all of the ugly feelings that come up anytime a conversation goes sideways with a friend or a coworker or family, anytime you're watching the news, especially if you indulge yourself in partisan news sources. All it takes is just one conversation to go sideways and bam, you're inflamed, bam, you're worked up, and it feels raw and it feels churning. There's so much of that going on these days. And on a good day, the best you can mount is a snarky, dismissive eye roll. Other days, you might even be hateful words. But here's the thing about that. We're all living in it. We're all facing that. That's going on everywhere. But I bet you had not considered this. Fantastic. That is great. I am so glad that's happening because you are sitting on a golden opportunity. Because your demon person is so difficult for you, it's that difficulty that makes this opportunity golden. Because if you can access even a little bit of egoless love there, well, then you can do it anywhere. Now, let's be honest, let's be realistic. We can't really do egoless love with our devil person. We just can't do it. But again, we're only after a little bit because we're training. We're trying to stretch ourselves just a little bit. And with just a little bit of reconfiguring how we think, we might be able to access that little bit even with this difficult person. So a little context to help explain how this training might go. You will remember the loving kindness meditation from back in the days when we didn't just do this. And you'll remember how the process goes. When we do that meditation, we use a key principle, and it is the one I just mentioned, starting where we can start. So in that meditation, we stir ourselves to kindness, to compassion, and we make our starting point someone dear to us. Perhaps a child or a lover, someone who is very easy to be compassionate toward, someone very easy to understand, someone very easy for us to love. We start there so that we can locate the place inside of us where we are able to be compassionate, the place inside of us where we are able to be kind and understanding and loving. And then we move on to the second movement of the meditation, because after we have located that place within us, we then go and access it again and extend it to a neutral person. We start with a dear person, and then we practice doing it with a neutral person. Now, the truth is, that is not much harder to do. It's just very unfamiliar because we don't go through our days practicing deep compassion for neutral people. So consequently, we don't apply it that way. It's not that hard to do. We just don't do it. But it turns out when we do, it begins to change us. The practice begins to expand us. We begin to be capable of things that we were not previously capable of doing. Now, in that meditation, we stretch further. To a mildly irritating person, we can eventually go on to an even painful person. Well, it's a good meditation, and it trains us to expand ourselves with the intention, with the purpose of helping ourselves grow. So it's a good meditation. But it's also a principle. And it's a principle that applies in many different ways. The principle is start where we can and then do that. Stretch a little bit and we'll be able to do more tomorrow. Start where we can and do that. Stretch a little bit and we'll be able to do even more tomorrow. So, even with your devil person or your devil group, turns out human brains are hardwired to have a compassionate response in one particular setting. and that is when we see human suffering. And because of that nifty little brain trick, you might be able to configure your thinking so that you could access just a little bit of compassion even for the demon person. If you could imagine them suffering, might you be able to access compassion? Now, it's an exercise. It's not about the person, it's about us. Can you access compassion for your devil people? Can you imagine your nemesis losing a child? And might you have compassion for them in that context? Could you imagine them losing a spouse to a terrible disease, or losing their home, or losing their job? Now, the thing is, we can kill compassion. We can feel glee when our enemies suffer. But it turns out you actually have to work to do that. You have to work hard to be able to shut down your compassion in the face of human suffering. Now, we can do that work. We can shut that part of our brains down. But if we use this as a tool for helping us, it turns out we use it as a diagnostic tool. It helps us see where we are, because we're asking the question, am I able to access compassion for that demon person if they hurt, if they are suffering? And if I can, the next step is not very complicated. We just reach in and we access that compassion inside of ourselves. We locate where it is in our bodies, we locate where it is in our minds, and then we do it. We hold that compassion for that person. We carry that compassion for that person. And maybe we do it for several seconds. Maybe we could do it for a minute. Could we even do it for 2 minutes? And then maybe we do it again this afternoon. And then maybe we do it again tomorrow. We do access the compassion. We hold that compassion for our difficult person by using the brain trick, imagining them suffering. And then we talk about what we accessed inside of ourselves, because that deepens the experience. We talk about our compassion for them the same way that we would talk about our compassion for a stranger that we see in the news, someone who is hurting. My wife has been particularly moved recently by paying attention to what's happening to people in Afghanistan. Many of us are. Or, we've got a hurricane coming in the south again, and what's going to happen. So we see those in natural disaster or in war, and we see these times, and we can feel our compassion stirred where we can feel it. Maybe even for our demon person in the throes of suffering. Well, what we're doing if we do that, we are training. That training is preparing us for this last leg of the journey. But let's say you use this diagnostic tool. You find out if you are capable of exercising compassion toward this person, and the results of the test come back negative. Nope, cannot do it. It is too hard. There is too much pain. I cannot access love or compassion for that person. No problem. Don't start with the demon person. Start with a stranger on the news, in an auto accident, or facing a hurricane. Now, what we typically do when we come across those articles is we turn away and go to the next article. And we do that because there is a system instinct to conserve resources. And it is expensive for our mental, for our emotional, for our cognitive energy to process another person's suffering. So in our attempt to conserve resources, we turn away. Maybe we thank our lucky stars it wasn't us, but we disengage because it's too costly to engage with too much suffering. But when we're training for egoless, selfless love, instead of turning away, we allow ourselves to feel the cost of another person's suffering. We allow ourselves to feel our compassion even for the stranger. And then we feel it again this afternoon, and then maybe again tomorrow. And we go through these processes, not turning the page, but stirring ourselves to compassion. Again, training. Again, a diagnostic tool. Can I do compassion? Can I do selfless love for a stranger who is in pain? And if I can, then I do. and I hold it, and I carry it, and then I maybe do it again this afternoon, and maybe again tomorrow. But let's just say I can't do that either. I feel stretched too thin. I don't have the resources for another person's pain. I am swamped by my own pain. Well, no problem. We don't start with the stranger either. Cultivate means we start where we are. So maybe we're just standing in the checkout line. We have to be there anyway. And we notice a defiant, surly, bad-tempered teenager. See if you can see beyond the surface and imagine what his or her underlying pain might be. What might their loneliness be? What might their rejection feel like? It's a diagnostic tool. Can I do that for the surly teenager in line? Can I do it? And if I can, then I do for many seconds, and then maybe again this afternoon, and then maybe again tomorrow. Practice being compassion for a grouchy kid. Cultivate it. Don't turn away. Don't dismiss. Feel your own kindness and your own compassion. But if you can't do that, no problem. A misbehaving child will surely show up in a restaurant sometime, and there will be tears, and it will be irritating. Can you access your own compassion for an exhausted child? Or for a parent who is feeling overwhelmed or worn out, and maybe that parent is struggling with how to parent well and feeling embarrassed because clearly they haven't figured it out and now it's on public display. Can you feel compassion there? And if you can, that's where you start. Practice compassion for a crying child. Practice compassion for a spent parent. Don't turn away. Don't stop at irritation. Don't stop with the eye roll. Go deeper. Find your kindness and then do it. Be it. Sustain it. But again, can't get there? Start with a pet. Can you find tenderness in your heart for your dog or for your cat? Or if not, how about a suffering animal? If you could get there, start there. Where can you start? We start where we are, and we cultivate that. We start where we are, and we sustain, we hold on to, we carry what we have. Do that, and tomorrow we'll be able to do more. Now, I kind of suspect you'll be surprised if you start this training assessing how far along you are on the spectrum. I suspect you might be able to access understanding and compassion and empathy and kindness even with your most difficult people. I suspect you'll be able to do more than you think you could do, because it turns out that's not usually the biggest hurdle. It turns out the biggest hurdle is usually the habit of turning away. Usually the biggest hurdle is the habit of not doing it. We are hardwired for compassion. You can look at it from evolutionary terms about how we work within altruism within a group, or you can look at it from the first story of our book, that we are carriers of inner light. We carry selflessness and love inside of ourselves. We can do it, we can access it, and we can usually do it better than we think we can. But the habit gets set of turning away, not practicing it. The habit gets reinforced by the culture around us that is not practicing compassion, not training ourselves for agape. We are not seeking out that place inside of us that is capable of this. We're not staying there and strengthening it inside of ourselves. That's usually the limiting factor. We don't do the training. So, this week, what do you say we try? Set some reminder, maybe in your phone, maybe while you're sitting there right now, to look for an opportunity to remind yourself to not turn away, to make a diagnosis of where you are. Am I capable of actually extending compassion in that setting? And if so, do it for several seconds. And then maybe again this afternoon, and maybe again tomorrow. Access tenderness because you have it inside of you. Access compassion. Access the forgiveness that you have inside of you. Access understanding. Do that today, and tomorrow you'll be able to do more. And then, when the journey starts to make the turn for home, we'll be ready. And so, indwelling divine, may we be ready. Amen. Well, if you would, please prepare your offerings. We are all online givers now. If you go to our website, at the top of the page, there's a button that says donate, and several different ways that you can do that. But as we say all the time, an investment in spiritual community returns a profound return on investment. When we give our time, and when we give our energy, and when we give our love, and when we give our dollars, here's what happens to that. We give it to one another. And here's what one another does with it. We turn around and we give it back. And so what we find is that the sum is greater than the parts. We end up finding a context in which we are deeply transformed. Investment in spiritual community is a great return on investment. And so, let us keep donating. Let us keep doing that. And in a moment, we're going to dismiss the live stream, and we're together going to do What Are You Thinking? You know the first question, where have you seen egoless love or ego-diminished love? Or did you receive her as giver? For those of you on the live stream, I put all three questions in the notes, so you can find them there. You can have that discussion at home if you would like. Well, if you would, let's put our hands on our hearts and let us remember as they go that we are, every one of us, carriers of the indwelling divine. Love and joy and peace, kindness, goodness are in us. Compassion and understanding is in us. We are carriers of the inner light. And if you would, extend your other hand to our city, and let's look for opportunities to share what's in us with the people that we live and work, go to school with, looking for opportunities to repair and heal our worlds. Amen. God bless you. You are dismissed. The rest of us, we've got something to do.